I would say the users are bringing insight that the software vendors don't necessarily bring, which is a good point because, I was an Articulate customer, and I was one of those people who was sending a feature request like every day. This should be easy enough to do, and all this stuff. And then you realize when you work for the company, you realize it's not easy to add a new feature into software. So if you're sending feature requests, just know that. But one of the things I always tell people, kind of goes to what she was saying, was the software vendors just build a tool with features in it. But they don't tell you how to do your work. But it's when you're actually a user and you're doing work, you then determine how to use those features to get your job done, and you start to build some best practices. When you're in the community with other people, you can share that back and forth. So the users who actually use the tools have a lot more insight into what to do with the tools than the vendor does, who just knows the features in the software. So that's one of the things. But the main thing is, it means we have less customer support, right? Because if we can self-serve or create an environment for you to self-serve, then we don't have to commit resources to doing that. If we can say, if you take 100 questions and most people have those 100 questions, or those are the most frequent questions, if we can answer those for you and get all that stuff and get as much planned for you and make it easy for you, then the community is going to be valuable for you, and it's valuable for us because we can offer a better customer service experience. That's from their vendor perspective. If I was a Volkswagen Beetle enthusiast and I had a user community, what would be the focus of the user community? What would drive that user community?
Word of mouth and experience to drive other people to be interested in it.
Okay, the word of mouth and experience. But what if you were the camaraderie, right? I mean, what would people who were Volkswagen enthusiasts, what would they do in a user community? Would they be sharing software tips? What would it, like you had a bunch of bug owners, right? What would they be?
Talking about how they're using a bug and how much fun it is and what's great about it.
Yeah, they'd have post photos of their bugs and all that stuff, right? I had one guy I was doing a similar presentation in Tennessee, and this guy who was an RV guy, and he was talking about they had an RV community, and apparently there's like a feud between like 40-foot long RV owners and 20-foot long RV owners. So he's going on about this difference in their community because it was kind of creating a lot of tension. So it's a wacky world of RV owners. So each community, even though you have communities, what they do and what they focus on are going to be completely different. They share, it's all about the sharing with each other and learning from each other, but the focus or what they do in a community is going to be different. So what a software vendor does with the community is different than what Volkswagen hobbyists would do, or if you went to like a religious group in their community, their focus would be a little different as well.
I just kind of had a comment because you're building loyalty through this community to the product. And how does that impact your sales?
Yeah, for the company, it's part of what we do just as a company, and that we understand software. Anybody can copy the software. We sit there, we've got a new product that we're working on right now. I sit in these meetings and we're spending weeks talking about simple user interface things, right? So we make that investment, we spend all that time doing that. But you release the software, and as soon as you do that, there's going to be a company in Russia or China that can pretty much rebuild your software. So you're never going to protect that. But for us, from a company position, you can't rebuild a good user community. It's either there or not. It's an authentic thing, and so you can't copy that. So that's kind of why we focus on it, because we see the value. And while this sounds trite, I don't want to sound like an Articulate commercial, but we really do, our mission is to help you get the most value out of the investment you made in the tools. You're not buying a $20 piece of software, so the community for us is a large way for us to say, you've made this investment in the software, we're going to do everything we can to help you get the most value out of it. So that's kind of the focus in our community. But every community, the key point is every community is a little bit different. So just because you have a community doesn't mean what they do and the norms and the practices they have as a community, that they're all going to be the same. So here's the key thing, and this is where I think, to me, is one of the big learning things. These stats are all made up, by the way. But it's pretty accurate, made-up stat. Now you have about 95% of the people who come into the user community or into a community are lurker-type people. They're on the periphery, right? And they kind of just watch. And if you've been involved in other communities, think about, like, if you had a question, like say you have a question about how to do something in Gmail, you go do a search, you come to the Gmail user community, and then you're kind of lurking because you're not really involved in the community, but you're gleaning the activity of other people that were involved. People were asking questions and helping each other. So the people in the community were doing things, and you're just kind of outside eavesdropping and collecting some information. And then you leave, because that's all you really needed from the community. You didn't, go get a virtual picnic basket and figure you're going to just kind of camp out at the Google community, right, and hang out. So about 95%, probably a higher percentage of people just go to the community. They want whatever the community has to offer that's going to help them, and then they want to leave. It's kind of like when you have like a party and you have a lot of food there, right? People just show up, eat your food, and then they leave. So that's what the community's like. About 95% of the people just want to come in there, get the help they need, and they want to leave. And then about 5% are really active in the community. And that's kind of the core of your community. What's interesting, if you go to the old Articulate community, we have about 200,000 members, and you look at the number one person who was posting in there in terms of activity was probably about 5,000, maybe 6,000 posts. You get down, so it's about 200,000 people, right? Well, let's say only 50,000 were real people, right? So we'll trim it down, right? So the number one person might be about 6,000 posters or posts. You bring that down to say like the number 50 person, so 50th. That person might be at about 200 posts. You get down to number 100, they might be at about 50 posts. You get down to 200, my guess is you're probably looking at 5 or 6 posts for the person who's the 200th ranked person in the community of say, 50,000 people. And that's pretty typical of any user community, that you have a core group of people that drive all the activity, and then you have that 95% of the people that just kind of want the information to leave. The problem that a lot of organizations have is, if you were going to, let's do this, if you were going to sell, you have a product and you want to sell a product, like you've made some new soft drink and you want to sell a product, and they say, okay, we're going to divide this up into 2 groups. You got 95, you got 100 people here, 95 in this group and 5 in this group. Which group are you going to go sell your new product to? You're going to sell it to 5%? You're not going to make a lot of money. Unless,
but they're going to, I'm looking at it from the perspective that they're going to post.
okay, so yeah, so I guess that would make sense if you're going to work with them, because that kind of gets to my point later in the thing. But I think if you just look at the numbers, I didn't frame it right, but if you just look at the numbers, you'd go to the 95, right? Because that's the bulk of your, that's where everybody's at. The problem that communities have is they tend to focus on the 5%, but they want the 95 to become part of the 5%. So the 5% and the 95 are 2 completely different groups. And so I think one of the big changes strategically for companies is to get away from the 5% people and focus on how to service the 95%, because the 5% is always going to be there. Those people that make up that 5%, they're always going to be there because there's something about them that enjoys the community stuff. But that 95% is not there, so you've got to figure out how to get the 95%, and what are their needs and how we meet their needs. Yes?
The 5%, though, can be both beneficial and tremendously detrimental. And I remember when Microsoft launched Bob,
right?
There was 5% that absolutely hated it. And they blogged and posted and destroyed it. And it was amazing because the other 95% went, hey, look at the 5%. They think this sucks, so we're not going to get it. And it died on the vine. And there were some nice things about it, but it never lived because that 5% is so influential.
But they did keep Clippy for a while.
You don't remember Bob? I never heard of Bob. How young are you? What about Bob? Bob.
Yeah, that does date you a little.
Thank you, son.
But there's some good points then about the 5% because they kind of work into the presentation here. But one of the key points is you want to think of those as two very distinct groups. So one group is focused on kind of getting some information and leaving, and the other group is focused on real community activity and really kind of want to belong. So it's something about being part of that community that's important to them. So anybody read this book, Trade Off? One day somebody will. It's a great book. And it's interesting because in the book, the author of the book talks about position your product. So he's saying, anytime you buy a product, you make a choice, and you're making a trade-off. There's never the 100% right product, right? You're always looking at something, I can get this car, I can get this car, then you kind of look at the pros and cons, and you make a decision. So when you make that decision, though, you've made a trade-off because maybe there was a feature or something in the other product that you like, but it's not available in the one that you bought, but for whatever reason you bought the one you bought, right? So you're always making some sort of trade-off in your decisions. So he says, the consumers do that. So he was looking at the different products, and let me go back here. I thought I had another slide. So he says you kind of have two spectrums. So on one end you have high fidelity, and on the other hand you have high convenience. So his thing is you should position your product at one end or the other, and then you'll be really successful. The more convenient you can make it,